Drifting through the void in a ship that looked like it had given up caring a century ago, Captain Scylla's dray was starting to feel the same way. He stared at the screen, which displayed a fractured image of their destination, a forgotten alien seed vault floating in the middle of nowhere. A seed vault, he muttered, the skepticism dripping from his voice like oil from a rusty pipe. Bet the aliens thought they'd need this after a long nuclear winter. What do you think, Leora? Leora Kintara, the biologist who insisted on dragging him halfway across the galaxy, was busy poking at her datapad with the enthusiasm of someone reading their own obituary. I think it beats the hell out of another meeting with the Earth Agricultural Council, she replied, her tone drier than a Martian summer. And who knows, maybe we'll find something useful. Useful? Leora, we're in a cosmic junkyard. If anything's left, it's probably got more legs than a centipede and twice the attitude. Scylla's leaned back in his seat, which let out a groan that echoed his own. Anyway, there's no turning back now. So let's hope this place isn't guarded by space raccoons or something. The ship, aptly named the Fortuitous Misadventure, grumbled as it adjusted course, swooping toward the vault with all the grace of a drunken pigeon. Scylla's couldn't help but chuckle. Can you believe the universe sent two of its finest idiots to play farmers in space? Leora shrugged, eyes still glued to her screen. Speak for yourself. I'm a visionary, remember. Right? Because visionaries always end up in decrepit ships looking for alien salad dressing, Scylla's shot back, his grin widening. As they neared the vault, the ship's sensors flickered to life, sounding alarms that suggested it found this excursion just as ridiculous as they did. We're here, Scylla's announced unnecessarily, flipping switches that looked like they hadn't been flipped in a century. Let's not die today, all right. Exiting the ship, they were greeted by the sight of the vault, an imposing structure that seemed to suck light into its dark, angular maw. The entrance loomed ahead, promising secrets or, more likely, dust and disappointment. Looks friendly, Scylla said, waving a hand at the ominous doors. Leora rolled her eyes, her usual response to his commentary. Let's just get inside before we have to argue with the ship about leaving. Inside, the air was stale and silent, like a tomb that had forgotten to be creepy. Rows upon rows of sealed pods lined the walls, each labeled in a language that looked like a drunk octopus had gotten hold of a pen. Aliens sure had a thing for squiggles, Scylla's noted, adjusting his visor to translate the symbols. Or they were just really bad artists, Leora replied, scanning the pods with her datapad. This could be incredible, Scylla's. Imagine the breakthrough if we find something that can grow in Earth's crap soil. I can imagine the report, Dear Earth found some weird seeds, might survive the apocalypse. Also, we didn't die. You're welcome. Scylla's chuckled, moving further into the vault. They worked systematically, neither talking much, each lost in the hum of their own thoughts and the occasional hiss of Leora's scanner. Hey, check this out, she called, gesturing at a pod that seemed to vibrate slightly under her touch. Scylla's ambled over, raising an eyebrow. Congratulations, you broke it. No, really, look, Leora insisted, pointing at the readings on her screen. There's something alive in there. Alive. In this place, it can't be anything friendly. Probably a carnivorous plant just waiting for a hug. Scylla's peered closer, his gloved fingers tapping the pod's surface. Or it's a bacterial colony, Leora suggested, her voice tinged with excitement. Dormant but still viable. Scylla sighed, crossing his arms. Great, last thing we need is an alien germ party. A sudden clatter echoed through the vault as the pod's seal released with a pop, sending a thin mist into the air. They both froze, watching the vapor dissipate like smoke signals spelling out run. Leora, was that supposed to happen? Not unless you want to star in an alien horror movie, she replied, eyes wide as the mist settled around them. Well, shit, Scylla's muttered, reaching for his comm link. Scylla's to Misadventure, prep for immediate departure. We've got a potential code brown here. The ship's AI, a snarky construct Scylla's had lovingly named Regret, responded with its usual cheerlessness. Acknowledged, Captain, preparing to flee like cowards. Leora shot him a look as they hurried back toward the entrance. Don't tell me this is how you'd planned our expedition to end. Hey, I'm a fan of living. Call me old-fashioned, Silas replied, quickening his pace. And by the way, remind me to never trust anything that comes out of a sealed alien pod again, all right? Behind them, the vault doors groaned shut, as if to say, good luck out there. They sprinted back to the ship, lungs burning, minds racing with what they'd just unleashed. Think it'll follow us? Leora asked as they reached the airlock. If it does, it's welcome to the ship. Just as long as it promises not to touch anything, Silas replied, slamming the control panel and watching the airlock seal shut. Once inside, they collapsed into their seats, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. So, Leora said, trying to catch her breath, do we tell Earth about this, and risk them sending more idiots into space to fix our mess? Silas shook his head. Let's just say we found some dust and call it a day. Regret chimed in with its usual sarcasm. Captain, would you like me to log this as another successful failure? Sounds about right, Silas sighed, running a hand through his hair. Just another day in the grand adventure of screwing up in space. As the ship powered up, ready to leave the vault behind, Silas couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just poked a sleeping beast. A beast that was all too eager to join them on their journey back to civilization. Well, here's to hoping whatever we let loose likes space travel, Leora said, her attempt at humor masking the underlying fear. Silas chuckled, though the sound was hollow. Yeah. Otherwise, we're about to star in the worst road trip ever. The engines hummed to life, propelling the fortuitous misadventure away from the vault, away from whatever unknowns they'd awakened. But as they drifted back into the blackness of space, Silas couldn't help but wonder just how far their latest discovery would follow them. It was only a matter of time before they found out. Silas Dre leaned back in his well-worn seat, the fortuitous misadventure purring around him like a senile cat. He considered lighting a cigarette, then remembered they were in space, and that shit didn't mix well with recycled oxygen. Well, Leora, here we are, running away from yet another disaster of our making. Maybe next time they'll send someone competent. Leora Kintara, ever the optimist in a galaxy full of pessimists, tapped away at her datapad. Oh, don't sell yourself short, Silas. Not everyone could have opened a can of space germs quite so elegantly. He snorted. Yeah, well, if idiocy were an Olympic sport, I'd have gold-plated stupidity hanging from my neck. They'd left the alien seed vault in the rear view, metaphorically speaking, since spaceships hadn't needed rear mirrors since about 2 centuries ago. And now, in the comforting hum of the ship's engines, they were left to ponder just what they'd unleashed and how fast they could outrun it. Leora squinted at her screen. You know, I've been picking up some odd readings on a nearby planet, something that shouldn't be there. Silas raised an eyebrow, the universal sign for what now? Please tell me it's not another vault. My heart can't take another dose of alien Pandora. Not a vault, Leora replied, her eyes narrowing as she flicked through the data. But there's biological activity. And it's spreading. He turned his chair towards her, intrigued despite himself. Biological activity on a barren rock. That sounds about as likely as me winning a beauty contest. Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, Captain, she shot back with a smirk. But this is weird. The planet was dead as a politician's promised last time anyone checked. But now there's greenery popping up faster than a bureaucrat at a bribe buffet. Silas stood, sauntering over to peer over her shoulder. Sure enough, the datapad displayed a view of a planet that looked suspiciously greener than it had any right to be. Oh great, we've accidentally turned on the universe's gardening mode. Leora didn't take her eyes off the screen. It's gotta be those bacteria we let loose. Maybe they're doing more than just throwing a party in the air. Terraforming then, Silas mused, rubbing his chin like he was considering shaving for once. Wouldn't that be a fun little disaster? Depends, Leora replied, her tone chipper in a way that made him suspect she was enjoying this. If it works, we could be heroes. If it doesn't, well, we're already fugitives from common sense. Guess we should check it out, Silas said, resigning himself to yet another potentially lethal excursion. Wouldn't want to miss the chance to say, "I told you so" on the way to our fiery demise. As the fortuitous misadventure changed course, Silas watched the gray-blue sphere grow larger on the screen. It looked like a marble shot through with veins of green, an infection of life on a long-dead world. Hope there's space for us to park without getting a ticket. The ship entered the planet's atmosphere with all the subtlety of a drunk trying to tiptoe across a squeaky floor. Engines are holding up, Silas noted, patting the controls like they were a beloved pet prone to biting. Miracles never cease, Leora muttered, adjusting the external sensors to get a better look at the landscape below. Look at that. It's like a jungle. The terrain was lush, verdant, and utterly out of place. Trees stretched upwards as if trying to touch the stars, and Silas imagined they were probably just as confused about being there as he was. Guess we found our little green men just not how we expected. Leora nodded, her expression a blend of excitement and apprehension. We need to collect samples, figure out what the hell's going on here. Collect samples, Silas echoed, as if trying to convince himself that was a good idea. Sure, why not? A little field trip never hurt anyone who survived it. They suited up, preparing to confront the unknown, or more accurately, their own stupidity in action. As the airlock cycled open, a rush of humid, earthy air hit them. It smelled like life, like things growing and changing, and Silas found it oddly comforting. Well, at least it doesn't smell like impending doom. Yet, Leora added, stepping into the green. Come on, let's see what we've done. The planet's surface was a riot of colors and textures, an explosion of flora that seemed to defy logic. Silas and Leora moved cautiously through the underbrush, their boots sinking into the loamy ground. Feels like walking on a sponge, Silas muttered, pushing aside a vine that seemed to be waving at him. Look at these plants, Leora marveled, examining a cluster of broadleaf specimens. This looks like a cross between Earth flora and something completely alien. Alien gardening tips must be top secret, Silas quipped. Or maybe they just have a better fertilizer. They continued deeper into the jungle, the air thick with the scent of pollen and mystery. Silas found himself half expecting a giant space bee to buzz past, or perhaps an alien Tarzan to start swinging through the trees. Instead, they were greeted by silence, punctuated only by the distant rustle of leaves. See anything that screams killer plant? Silas asked, glancing around at the unfamiliar flora. Not yet, Leora replied, scanning the surroundings with her datapad. But the biodiversity here is incredible. The bacteria must be creating a perfect environment for these plants to thrive. Silas shrugged, unimpressed. Great, so we've made a paradise. Too bad it's on a planet no one cares about. Hey, maybe this is the start of something big, Leora said, her voice holding a note of hope. If these bacteria can terraform a dead planet, imagine what we could do on Earth. Or maybe we've just created the universe's largest weed patch, Silas countered. Either way, someone's gonna have to mow the lawn. They stopped at a clearing, surrounded by towering trees with bark that shimmered in the filtered light. Leora crouched down, examining a patch of soil that seemed to be writhing with activity. These microorganisms are interacting with the environment at an unbelievable rate. It's like they're rewriting the ecological script. Hope they can write happily ever after, Silas mused, scanning the tree line for anything that might want to eat them. But hey, at least we won't need to lie on our report. This is as close to a miracle as we'll probably get. Leora collected samples, carefully sealing them in containers that promised to hold even the most rebellious bacteria. This could change everything, Silas. We might have stumbled onto a way to fix the wastelands back home. And here I thought we'd just find some alien Chaya pets, he replied, though he couldn't quite keep the hint of admiration from his voice. Guess this might be worth the trouble after all. As they made their way back to the fortuitous misadventure, Silas couldn't help but feel a strange sense of accomplishment. Sure, they'd opened Pandora's box, but maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worthwhile inside. "Think we'll get a medal for this?" Leora asked, her tone light but her gaze serious. "Probably get a bill for the damages," Silas chuckled. "Or maybe just a pat on the back before we're tossed into a bureaucratic black hole." They secured the samples and prepared for liftoff, the ship vibrating with the anticipation of escape. As they looked back at the rapidly shrinking planet, Silas felt a twinge of something he hadn't expected: hope. "Here's to new beginnings," he said, raising an imaginary glass. Leora nodded, her smile genuine. "And to the next disaster we accidentally create." The fortuitous misadventure surged into the void, leaving behind the burgeoning world they'd inadvertently helped create. Silas leaned back, letting the familiar hum of the engine soothe his nerves. For all their mistakes, maybe they'd done something right this time. "Think the universe will forgive us for our little oopsie?" Leora asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Probably not," Silas replied, a smirk tugging at his lips. "But at least we can say we tried." As the ship drifted further into the stars, Silas couldn't shake the feeling that their adventure was only just beginning. Whatever the future held, at least they'd be facing it with the same reckless determination that had gotten them this far. And really, what could possibly go wrong? Silas leaned back in his captain's chair, feet propped up on the console like he owned the place. Which, technically, he did, though that was more of a testament to his knack for avoiding creditors than any real financial acumen. Leora was hunched over her datapad, doing whatever techno-magic she did to keep the fortuitous misadventure from falling apart at the seams. "So," Silas said, breaking the hum of the engines with his baritone drawl, "what are the chances we get through this without some intergalactic incident? Because I'd rate my confidence somewhere between slim and hell no." Leora tapped her screen, her fingers dancing over it like a pianist in a digital concerto. "I'd say about the same chance you have of winning that beauty contest, Captain," Silas chuckled. "Maybe I can bribe the judges with alien Chaya pets." Before Leora could retort with another razor-sharp quip, an alarm blared through the cabin, a sound Silas had learned to associate with incoming trouble. He swiveled his chair towards the main display, where a new blip had appeared against the planet's backdrop. "Looks like we've got company," he said, adjusting his posture. The blip resolved into a sleek starship, its design all sharp angles and ominous glow, like someone had weaponized a geometry problem. "Yay, visitors," Leora muttered, pulling up the comms interface. "Think they'll be bringing snacks? Let's hope it's not a Last Supper." The alien vessel hailed them with a transmission that crackled through the speakers like static soaked in disdain. Silas slapped the comms button and leaned in. "This is Captain Silas Dre of the Fortuitous Misadventure. Who am I addressing?" A voice responded, smooth and dripping with the kind of authority that made you instinctively check your fly. "This is Envoy Zivara of the Zekrel Dominion. You are trespassing on our claimed territory." Silas shared a glance with Leora. "Claimed territory, huh? Didn't see your signs posted anywhere. Your activities have caused significant disruption to our ecosystem," Zivara continued, ignoring his sarcasm. "This planet is under our domain and your actions could be considered an act of aggression." "Great," Silas muttered, covering the mic. "We've pissed off the space landlords. Maybe they're here to collect rent," Leora suggested, not without a hint of amusement. Silas clicked the mic back on. "Look, Zivara, we didn't know anyone had dibs on this rock, but you've got to admit it was looking a bit dead before we showed up." "Our claim predates your interference," Zivara insisted, voice cold enough to frost the cabin. "You will vacate immediately or face consequences." Silas sighed, knowing diplomacy was about as much his forte as ballet. All right. Let's not get hasty. We might have unleashed a bit of a green thumb here, but it's not like we planted a bomb." "Yet," Leora interjected with a grin. "Can we negotiate?" Silas asked, ignoring Leora's irreverence. "I mean, we've got potential here. Maybe there's a middle ground." There was a pause, the kind that fills with dread and anticipation. Finally, Zivara spoke again, reluctant and measured. "Very well. We will discuss terms face to face. Prepare for our arrival." The transmission ended, leaving an eerie silence that felt more accusatory than tranquil. Silas rubbed his temples, face to face with a bunch of aliens. "What's the worst that could happen?" "Well," Leora said, standing and stretching like a cat that had just napped through a war, "at least we'll know if they are uglier than you." The airlock hissed open, and Silas found himself standing in the cargo bay, flanked by Leora and a sense of impending doom. Zavara emerged from the other side, flanked by a pair of Zekrel soldiers who looked like they'd been carved from solid disapproval. The envoy was humanoid enough, like someone had given a Picasso painting a body in a superiority complex. "Welcome aboard," Silas said, plastering on a smile that was anything but sincere. "Hope our humble ship meets your standards." Zavara's eyes, or what passed for them, swept over the bay with a look that suggested they'd seen better places in a scrap heap. "We appreciate your willingness to negotiate, Captain Dre." Silas tilted his head towards Leora. "This is Leora, my tech wizard. She's the brains, I'm the sarcasm." Zavara nodded in acknowledgement, though their expression remained unreadable. "Let us begin." They moved to the makeshift meeting table, really just a crate repurposed for diplomacy. Silas leaned against it, crossing his arms. "So, what's it gonna take to keep everyone happy and not shooting?" Zavara clasped their hands together, the gesture oddly reminiscent of a principal about to scold a wayward student. "The Zekrel Dominion has interests in developing this planet for our own purposes. Your interference has accelerated an ecological shift that conflicts with our plans." Leora glanced at Silas, clearly fighting the urge to say something snarky. Instead, she settled for, "We didn't exactly plan on playing God here." "Indeed," Zavara said, their tone softening, though not by much. "However, we have observed the significant potential in the bacteria you've introduced. It may be possible to integrate these changes into our agenda." "So," Silas said, spreading his hands like a magician about to pull a rabbit from a hat, "we're not getting vaporized today." "That depends on the terms we settle upon," Zavara replied, their eyes locking with Silas in a way that suggested blinking was optional. The negotiation dragged on, a verbal fencing match with the sharpness of a dull spoon. Silas proposed a cooperative research venture, allowing the Zekrel to study the bacteria while ensuring Silas and his crew didn't end up as cosmic dust. Zavara countered with demands for oversight, resource sharing, and a stern warning against further tampering. "Seems like a win-win," Silas said eventually, feeling as if he just managed to charm a bear out of hibernation. Zavara inclined their head ever so slightly. "A tentative accord, then. We will monitor the situation closely." "Monitoring's fine," Silas assured, though he figured monitoring was just a polite way of saying watching you like a hawk with trust issues. As Zavara prepared to leave, Leora piped up, "By the way, what's your take on our bacteria? Any chance it could do something unexpected?" The envoy paused, considering. "The potential for unexpected outcomes is always present, especially with such unpredictable variables. We will observe and adapt." "Comforting," Silas muttered to Leora as Zavara and their entourage departed. "I love it when our lives depend on adapting." Once the Zekrel ship had faded into the void, Silas and Leora found themselves back in the cabin, the weight of diplomacy replaced by the clunky comfort of familiar chaos. Leora returned to her datapad, scanning the planet's surface for insights into its flourishing ecosystem. "Anything interesting?" Silas asked, peering over her shoulder like a nosy neighbor. "Fascinating stuff," she replied, her eyes bright with discovery. "The bacteria have triggered a rapid evolution in plant life. Whole species are emerging, adapting to the new environment almost overnight." Silas whistled low, impressed despite himself. "Guess Mother Nature's having a speed run." Leora nodded. "It's incredible. The rate of change suggests the bacteria are not just terraforming, they're enhancing the planet's ability to adapt. It's like they are rewriting the rules." "Hope they are good authors," Silas said, settling back into his chair. "Last thing we need is a plot twist involving carnivorous plants." "Always the optimist," Leora quipped, though she didn't look up from her screen. Silas chuckled, though the sound was half-hearted. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd kicked off something far bigger than their ship could handle. But then, when had that ever stopped them? "Think we'll make it through this without the universe deciding to swat us like flies?" he asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them like dust. Leora smiled, tapping a few more commands into the datapad. "If we don't, at least we'll go out in style." Silas grinned, a lopsided thing that spoke more of defiance than mirth. "Style's all we've got left." As the fortuitous misadventure drifted through the void, carrying its cargo of optimism and impending disaster, Silas couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride in their unintended achievement. They'd played God, sure, but they'd also managed to do something remarkable, and if there was a fallout, well, they'd face it head-on. Because in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, survival was its own reward, and sometimes that was enough. Silas leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, which was in surprisingly good condition compared to the rest of the fortuitous misadventure. "So, we're not getting vaporized today." "That's something, right?" Leora didn't look up from her datapad. "Sure, if you consider living another day to be a win." "Low bar, but I'll take it," Silas replied, stretching his arms. "Guess we should celebrate not being space dust just yet." "Celebrate with what? Last I checked, we're out of booze and the replicator's on the fritz again." "Right," Silas sighed. "Forgot we live in the lap of luxury here." Leora kept her eyes on the datapad, fingers dancing across the screen. "You know, if the Zekrel decide to change their minds and blast us, at least we won't see it coming. No rear mirrors and all that." "Comforting thought," Silas muttered. "Like going to sleep with a warm gun under your pillow." As if on cue, the ship shuddered, a low groan echoing through the corridors. Silas frowned. "That's not ominous at all." Leora glanced up, her expression more annoyed than concerned. "Probably just the old girl settling, or maybe she's just protesting against your leadership." An alarm blared, shattering the brief illusion of safety. "And there's the incoming trouble theme music," Silas said, rolling his eyes as he jumped up. "Let's see what's trying to kill us now." They rushed to the main display where a new blip had joined the fray. It was the Zekrel ship, but something was different. Silas squinted. "They're moving in closer." "Looks like they're not big fans of social distancing," Leora quipped, though there was a tension in her voice that hadn't been there before. The comms crackled to life, and the voice of Envoy Zavara came through, smoother than an ice cube in hell. "Captain Dre, we have reconsidered our position." "Reconsidered?" Silas echoed, exchanging a look with Leora. "That's diplomatic speak for bend over, isn't it?" Zavara continued, unfazed. "Our analysts believe your presence here poses a greater risk than initially assessed. We must ensure the stability of our ecosystems." "Right," Silas said, trying to keep his tone light. "And by ensure you mean, our ship will be engaging containment protocols. We suggest you prepare to leave the vicinity." "Containment protocols?" Leora asked, eyebrows shooting up. "That sounds suspiciously like we're going to blow you to bits." Zavara's voice was as placid as ever. "We have no intention of engaging in hostile actions, provided you comply swiftly." The transmission cut off, leaving Silas and Leora in the kind of silence usually reserved for funerals. Silas clenched his jaw. "Well, that sounds like a politely phrased death threat." "Somebody's got to appreciate their commitment to etiquette," Leora said, her voice tight. "So, what's the plan?" Besides running and screaming, Silas paced the cramped bridge, a grin plastered on his face that was anything but genuine. "We improvise. Maybe we can outthink them." "Outthink an entire species known for their strategic prowess?" Leora asked, incredulous. "Sure, piece of cake." "No need to be pessimistic," Silas replied, though the sarcasm was as thick as the tension in the air. "Worst case, we die creatively." "That's almost inspiring," Leora said, reaching for her datapad. "Almost." They both knew the stakes had jumped higher than a flea on a hot plate. The Zekrel weren't just posturing, they were ready to take action, and fast. Silas slammed his fist into his palm. "Okay, think. How do we turn this around?" Leora tapped a few commands, her eyes scanning rapidly. "The bacteria. We know more about it than they do." Maybe we can use that. Use it how? It's not like we can launch a counterattack with germs. No, but we could slow them down. Maybe buy us some time to get out of here, Leora said, her fingers still flying over the datapad like they were afraid of getting caught slacking. Silas rubbed his chin, frown deepening. Okay, so we tweak the bacteria, make it. I don't know, less cooperative. More like give it something else to do, Leora replied. Distract it, redirect its growth. It's a long shot, but it's something. Silas nodded, the gears in his head turning even if the rest of the ship seemed reluctant to follow suit. All right, let's gamble with microscopic life. Just another Tuesday, huh? Wednesday, actually, Leora corrected, though her focus remained on her work. Silas chuckled, though his heart wasn't in it. Right. Hope you're better with bacteria than you are with calendars. Leora shot him a look that was both weary and amused. If we pull this off, I'll take up timekeeping as a hobby. Great, Silas said. When we survive, remind me to buy you a watch. They set to work, Leora's fingers a blur on her datapad, Silas offering the occasional sarcastic comment or genuinely terrible idea. It was a dance they knew well, 1 step forward, 2 steps sideways, and a leap of faith straight into a black hole. The ship rocked again, a not-so-gentle reminder that time was not on their side. Silas gripped the console, steadying himself. You ever feel like the universe is just messing with us? All the time, Leora replied, not missing a beat. But that's what makes it fun, right? Fun, sure, like a sharp stick in the eye. Leora let out a snort of laughter, then frowned in concentration. Okay, I think I've got something. We can tweak the bacteria to produce a kind of spore cloud around the ship. Should mess with their sensors. Should, you sure about that? Nope, she replied cheerfully. But if it doesn't work, we won't be around to care, will we? Silas grinned, a wry twist of his lips. No argument there, let's do it. With a few final taps, Leora initiated the program. The ship's systems hummed, a sound that was either reassuring or deeply unsettling depending on one's perspective. Now we wait, Leora said, leaning back in her chair, and hope they're as fond of surprises as we are. Silas nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. If this doesn't work, at least we'll go out in a blaze of incompetence. Hey, Leora said, nudging him with her elbow. Look on the bright side. We've got each other, and that's worth something, right? Silas chuckled, though it was more a bark than a laugh. Yeah, Leora. At the end of the universe, it's just us idiots. They watched the console, the silence stretching taut between them like a cable about to snap. Every second felt like an eternity, a countdown to either salvation or spectacular failure. Finally, the console beeped, a sound so unexpected in its innocuousness that it startled them both. Silas glanced at Leora, who was already leaning forward, eyes wide with anticipation. Looks like it's working, she said, disbelief coloring her voice. Their ship systems are registering interference. Really? Silas said, more surprised than he cared to admit. Guess we're not as doomed as we thought. Don't jinx it, Leora warned, though the relief in her tone was palpable. Silas couldn't help but grin, adrenaline and absurdity mixing in his veins. We actually did something right. Imagine that. Don't get used to it, Leora joked, but there was a warmth in her gaze that belied her words. Wouldn't dream of it, Silas replied, settling back as the tension eased just a fraction. But they both knew the reprieve was temporary. The Zekrel would adapt, find a way to counter their gambit, and the dance would begin anew. Still, for now, they had a moment, a fleeting victory in a universe that rarely granted such luxuries. Think we've got time for a victory lap? Silas asked, though he already knew the answer. Probably not, Leora said, her expression softening. But we've got a bit of breathing room. Let's not waste it. They shared a rare moment of silence, the kind that spoke more than words ever could. It was a fragile piece, held together by ingenuity and stubbornness, and they both knew it wouldn't last. Guess we should prepare for the next round, Silas said, breaking the quiet with a reluctant sigh. Yeah, Leora agreed. Back to the grind. But even as they returned to their posts, a spark of camaraderie lingered, a reminder that, against all odds, they were still here, still fighting. And as the fortuitous misadventure drifted through the void, its course uncertain but its spirit unyielding. Silas couldn't help but feel a flicker of something he hadn't dared to in a long time: hope. Because in a universe bent on their destruction, that flicker was a defiance all its own. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The dim lighting flickered intermittently on the Fortuitous Misadventures bridge, like the ship itself was rolling its eyes at the current predicament. Silas Dre stood with arms crossed, a picture of insouciance only slightly marred by the tension bunched in his shoulders. Leora, perched with her datapad like it was an extension of her own nervous system, was poking and prodding at the screen as though it had personally offended her. The Zekrel are not going to be happy when they realize their sensors are giving them the cosmic equivalent of a middle finger, Silas said, half to himself. His voice carried the undertone of someone who'd long since given up on logic and was now just here for the ride. Leora gave a dry chuckle. No, but maybe they'll appreciate the creativity. I hear they have a soft spot for abstract art. Does that include explosions? Silas asked, more than a tinge of fatalism in his voice. You betcha, Leora replied without looking up. Explosions are the universal language of oops. The Zekrel ship loomed on the main display like a shark in a kiddie pool, its sleek lines contrasting with the clunky, mismatched patchwork of the Fortuitous Misadventure. It was a reminder, as if Silas needed it, of just how outmatched they were. Right, Silas muttered, glancing around the bridge as though the chipped walls might provide some answers. Let's see if we can delay the inevitable a bit longer. Good pep talk, Leora said, finally tearing her eyes away from her datapad. Really stirs the spirit. Silas smirked. I'm available for motivational speaking. Reasonable rates. The ship's intercom crackled, and a voice laced with irritation came through. It was Terk, a wiry man with a perpetual scowl who seemed to think being a pessimist was a full-time job. Captain, you got a minute to explain why we're not hightailing it out of here? Silas sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Sure, Terk, but only if you promise not to whine about it. No promises, Terk replied, the sound of something clattering in the background. But I'll try to keep it to a dull roar. Leora rolled her eyes and leaned over to adjust a few settings on the console. Maybe we should just put him on loop and save ourselves the trouble of actual conversation. Tempting, Silas said, before activating the intercom. Look, Terk, we're working on it. Got a plan in motion, all right. Uh-huh, came the dubious reply. And does this plan involve us getting out of this mess alive, or is it more of a heroic last stand kind of thing? I prefer to call it creative crisis management, Silas replied, his sarcasm sharp enough to cut through hull plating. Good to know, Terk said, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could only come from years of practice. Because from here, it looks like we're stuck between a rock and a Zekrel warship. Relax, Terk, Leora cut in. If we die, at least it'll be memorable. Yeah, nothing like going out in a blaze of incompetence, Terk replied, disconnecting with a click that suggested he had better things to do than argue with the universe's unluckiest captain. Silas and Leora shared a look, an understanding passing between them that they were two fools in a galaxy that really didn't care about fools. So, how are morale levels, you think? Silas asked, though the answer was obvious. Well, Terk's being his usual ray of sunshine, Leora pointed out, which means everyone else is probably planning a mutiny in their spare time. Great, Silas said with a shrug. Add that to the list of things trying to kill us, right after alien containment protocols and general cosmic irony. They were interrupted by the sound of another alarm, a different tone that suggested more an existential crisis than imminent doom. Silas glanced at the console, then at Leora. That one's new. What now? Leora tapped a few commands, her brow furrowing. Looks like the life support systems are acting up. Probably just needs a good kick. A delicate touch, Silas said, rolling his eyes. And by kick, I assume you mean complete overhaul. Leora shrugged. Kicking is faster. They made their way to engineering, where the air was marginally warmer and smelled faintly of burnt circuits. a nostalgic scent for anyone who's spent too much time on ships held together by duct tape and sheer willpower. The life support system sat in the corner, a mass of tangled wires and flashing lights that seemed to mock their inadequacy with every flicker. "All right, let's see what we can do here," Silas said, crouching down to inspect the mess. "Any chance this heap of junk has a user manual? If it did, it'd be in a language that died out before we learned to walk," Leora replied, eyes scanning the panels like she was trying to read hieroglyphs. "But hey, at least we've got the universal troubleshooting technique." Silas raised an eyebrow. "What, swearing and kicking things until they work?" "Pretty much," she said, grabbing a tool that looked dangerously like a crowbar. "Shall we?" Together they wrestled with the system, cursing under their breaths and occasionally at each other. It was a rhythm they knew well: 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and a lot of hoping the whole thing wouldn't explode in their faces. "Think this is what they had in mind when they talked about team-building exercises?" Silas asked, wiping grease off his hands onto his trousers. "If it is, we should demand a raise," Leora replied, giving a particularly stubborn panel a satisfying thwack. "Raises and hazard pay," Silas agreed, though he doubted their likelihood of survival long enough to collect either. The console beeped reluctantly, as if acknowledging their efforts but not overly impressed by them. Lights blinked to life, and the hum of the life support system took on a slightly less ominous tone. "See, easy," Leora said, though the sarcasm was as thick as the grime on her fingers. Silas straightened, allowing himself a moment of triumph. "Piece of cake. Now if only the universe would throw us something we can't handle." The intercom crackled to life again, and for a moment Silas wondered if Terk had decided to lodge another complaint. But this time, the voice was different, softer, with a dangerous edge. It was Marin, a crew member known for her quietly cutting observations and a tendency to speak truths no one wanted to hear. "Captain," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "a word if you have a minute." Silas exchanged a glance with Leora, who gave a small shrug. "Go on. I'll hold the fort." "Right," Silas said, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to hear what Marin had to say. He found her in the galley, staring out the viewport at the swirling chaos of stars and debris that made up their current view. Marin was tall and lanky, with an intensity that made people take a step back even when she was perfectly pleasant. "You wanted to talk?" Silas asked, leaning against the doorframe with a casualness he didn't entirely feel. Marin nodded, not taking her eyes off the stars. "The crew's worried, Captain. Tensions are high, and not just because the Zekrel want to turn us into space confetti." Silas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know, but we're working on it. Might even get out of this alive if we're lucky." "Lucky's not a strategy," Marin said, finally turning to face him. Her expression was calm, but there was an edge to her voice that suggested fraying patience. "People need more than luck to hold on to. And what would you suggest?" Silas asked, his tone edging towards defensive. "I give them a pep talk about teamwork and positive thinking." Marin's lips quirked into a small, humorless smile. "I'm suggesting you level with them. Make them feel like they are part of the solution, not just the problem." "All right," Silas said, pushing off the doorframe. "I'll talk to them. But I'm not making any promises about optimism." "Wouldn't dream of it," Marin said, turning back to the stars. "Just make sure they know you're in this with them." Silas nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility a familiar if unwelcome presence. "I'll do what I can, but if this goes south, I'm blaming you for making me talk." "Deal," Marin said with a wry smile. Silas returned to the bridge, where Leora was still engrossed in her datapad. "How's our bacterial friends doing?" he asked, trying to inject some levity into his voice. "Still doing their thing," Leora replied, not looking up. "At least until the Zekrel decide they've had enough of our shenanigans." "Right," Silas said, scratching his chin. "Hey, listen, I was thinking. Maybe we should gather everyone, have a chat. Boost morale." Leora arched an eyebrow, finally glancing up. "You feeling okay, Captain?" "Don't get used to it," Silas said with a small grin. "Just figure we should remind everyone we're all in this together, might help." Could work, Leora agreed, inclining her head slightly. Or it could backfire spectacularly. Wouldn't be the first time, Silas said, hitting the intercom. All crew meet in the galley in 5. Captain's orders. The ship hummed around them, a backdrop of white noise that set Silas's nerves on edge. As they made their way to the galley, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a lion's den armed with nothing but smart remarks and duct tape. The crew gathered, a motley assortment of misfits and survivors who had somehow ended up on the universe's most unfortunate ship. Terk Marin and a few others whose names Silas had never quite managed to remember all looked at him expectantly, like he was about to perform a miracle or, at the very least, a decent magic trick. "Thanks for coming," Silas began, nodding at the assembled crew. "I know things have been less than ideal recently." "Understatement of the century," Terk muttered, earning a few nods and a faint ripple of laughter. "Yeah, well, understatement's all I've got right now," Silas said, earning a chuckle from Leora. "Look, I know we're in deep. The Zekrel aren't going to just pack up and go home because we're playing hide and seek with germs. So what's the plan, Captain?" Marin asked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "We're working on a few angles," Silas said. "Leora's got some ideas, and we're doing what we can to keep the Zekrel off our backs for as long as possible. But I need everyone on board with this. We're not going to make it if we're pulling in different directions." "Why should we trust you?" someone called from the back. A voice Silas recognized as one of the newer crew members, an engineer whose name escaped him. "Because the alternative is a lot worse," Silas replied bluntly. "I know I'm not perfect, and I know this ship isn't exactly a luxury cruiser, but we're all we've got right now, so, for what it's worth, I'm asking for your trust." The group was silent for a moment, the weight of their situation pressing down like gravity on steroids. Then Marin spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "I'm in. Let's see if we can make it out of this mess, huh?" Slowly, the rest of the crew nodded, murmuring their agreement or at least resignation. Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and nodded in return. "All right," he said, his voice carrying a hint of something that might have been hope. "Let's get to work. And maybe, just maybe, we'll live to regret it." As the crew dispersed, Leora caught his eye, her expression thoughtful. "Not bad, Captain. Maybe you missed your calling as a motivational speaker after all." Silas laughed, a genuine sound that felt good in the stale air of the galley. "Don't get used to it," he said, echoing his earlier words with a wry grin. "I've got plenty of other ways to disappoint." Together, they returned to the bridge, ready to face whatever the universe had in store. And as Silas settled into his seat, watching the stars slip by like old friends, he couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. Even if it was of the fortuitous misadventure groaned in protest as it floated precariously through the void, a testament to the universe's cruel sense of humor. Inside, the crew were no less frayed around the edges. The latest pep talk from Captain Silas Dre had been like slapping a band-aid on a hull breach, temporary and insufficient. Back on the bridge, Leora Kintara was hunched over her datapad like it was the Holy Grail. She had been working her magic, or what passed for it in this metallic coffin, for hours. Her fingers danced over the cracked screen, occasionally punctuating her silent struggle with a muttered curse. "Don't tell me you've fallen in love with that thing," Silas said, trying to appear casual as he leaned in the doorway. "Because I think it's cheating on you with the error message." Leora looked up, her eyes half narrowed. "You caught me. We're planning a spring wedding. You're not invited. Good. I hate weddings. Too much optimism." Silas folded his arms, watching her work with a mixture of admiration and despair. "Jokes aside," Leora said, swiping through a particularly stubborn bit of code, "I think I've got something." Silas's eyebrows went up. "Something that resembles a plan or just a new way to swear at the bacteria, both actually." She tapped the screen triumphantly. "I've found a way to send a signal to the bacteria. Like a cosmic Simon Says." Silas blinked. "And what, pray tell, does this cosmic game involve? Do they dance, explode, Form a Kangal line, not quite Captain Comedy, Leora replied, her wit as sharp as her focus on the task. We might be able to control their growth, direct them away from our hull, or at least convince them we're not the galaxy's tastiest snack. Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So we're not doomed, oh, we're still doomed. Just slightly less so. But hey, any port in a storm, right? Right, Silas agreed, his tone dry. Guess we should let the crew know there's a sliver of light at the end of this very dark, very long tunnel. Leora stood, stretching the kinks from her back. Let's just hope it's not an oncoming asteroid. Silas chuckled, a low sound that was more relief than humor. Gather the crew, he said, heading for the intercom. And let's see what kind of madness we can concoct together in the galley, a communal space that was as comforting as a rusty cage. The crew gathered once more. Terk was there, his scowl a permanent fixture, while Marin lounged against a bulkhead, her eyes sharp and perceptive. The rest of the motley band shuffled in, each wearing their own brand of skepticism like a badge of honor. Silas stood at the center, feeling like a ringmaster at the galaxy's worst circus. All right, everyone, he began, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Leora's got some good news. Leora stepped forward, holding up her datapad like it was a talisman against the cosmic chaos. We've got a way to communicate with the bacteria, she announced, her voice projecting a confidence that was infectious. We might be able to steer them away from the ship. A murmur went through the crowd, a mix of relief and disbelief. Terk snorted, unimpressed as ever. Might as well try talking them into building us a new ship while you're at it. Don't tempt me, Leora shot back. Desperation breeds innovation. Silas stepped in, sensing the tension like a third wheel. Look, it's not a perfect solution, but it's a start. And it's more than we had an hour ago. Marin nodded, her voice cutting through the noise. So what's the plan? We just point and shoot, more like point, pray, and shoot, Leora corrected, a wry smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'll need some help rigging the signal through the ship systems. We don't have a lot of power to spare, so it's going to be a bit of a patchwork job, patchwork. On this ship, someone quipped from the back. What a surprise, Silas chuckled. I know, right? Shocking. But we've got a fighting chance here, folks. Let's not squander it. Terk grumbled something under his breath but nodded, his reluctance tempered by the glimmer of hope in the room. Fine. I'll see what I can do with what's left of engineering. The crew dispersed, each to their tasks, leaving Silas and Leora alone in the galley. Think they'll pull it off? Silas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leora shrugged, her expression unreadable. They'll do what they always do. Make it work somehow. Silas nodded, comforted by her confidence. Let's get this show on the road then. With the crew scattered across the ship, transforming the fortuitous misadventure into a makeshift communications hub, Leora set about the delicate task of rerouting the ship's dwindling power reserves. It was like performing open-heart surgery with a spanner and duct tape. Terk, true to his word, was in engineering swearing at a panel that had seen better centuries. If this thing shorts out, I'm blaming you, he grumbled as Leora joined him, her toolkit clanging ominously. Fine. Add it to the list, she replied, sliding under a console to reconnect a bundle of wires that had apparently been chewed by time, or perhaps actual space rats. Remind me why we're doing this again. Terk groused, his fingers dancing over switches as if attempting a ballet. Because space confetti is a bad look for us, Leora muttered, twisting a wire into compliance. Besides, what's life without a little light electrocution? Less painful, for starters, Terk retorted, but there was a grudging respect in his voice. They were all tied to this ridiculous, dangerous endeavor, bound by the same desire not to be vaporized. Meanwhile, back on the bridge, Silas was coordinating efforts with the kind of flair only a half-desperate captain could muster. Marin had taken over the task of directing the crew, her efficiency a sharp contrast to Silas's improvisational style. We're set to go in 5, she announced, leaning over the console with the grace of someone who'd long since become part of the ship. Great, Silas replied, eyeing the viewport with the wary anticipation of a man expecting a meteor shower. Let's hope the Zekrel are feeling charitable. Charity's not in their vocabulary, Marin observed, but maybe they'll be amused by our gall. Amused is better than incinerated. In engineering, Leora and Terk made the final connections. All set, Leora said, brushing dust from her trousers as she stood. Let's see if my little bacterial love letter does the trick. The ship thrummed to life, a low hum that spoke of strained systems and exhausted circuits. Leora's signal pulsed out into the void, a message in a cosmic bottle, a plea, a command, a last-ditch effort to sway the swarming bacteria. Back on the bridge, Silas and Marin watched the monitors with bated breath. Any sign of a response? Silas asked, his voice tight with tension. Too early to tell, Marin replied, her gaze fixed on the data streaming in. But we're sending. That's something. The crew stood by, the silence heavy with anticipation as they waited for the universe to reveal its hand. For a moment, it felt like time itself had stalled, hanging suspended like the dust motes in the stale air. Then slowly, the monitors began to register a shift. The bacteria were responding, their patterns altering as if considering the signal's implications. It's working, Leora breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We've got their attention, he said. Now let's hope they like what we've got to say. The crew cheered, a ragged sound that spoke of relief and cautious optimism. But Silas knew better than to count his chickens before they hatched, or in this case, before they decided not to eat the ship. Don't break out the champagne just yet, he warned, though the corners of his mouth twitched upwards in something resembling a smile. Champagne, Marin echoed with a raised brow. On this ship. Now I know you're delusional. Wouldn't be the first time, Silas quipped, his tone light. But maybe, just maybe, we're on to something here. As the crew returned to their stations, the fortuitous misadventure continued its journey through the void, a battered beacon of human resilience amidst the stars. And though the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, for the first time in what felt like eons, hope flickered in the hearts of its weary travelers. Here's to making it out alive, Silas said, raising an imaginary glass as he surveyed the ragtag crew that had somehow become his family. And to whatever madness comes next. Leora clinked her own invisible drink against his. To madness, she agreed, her voice warm with camaraderie. And with that, they set their sights on the future, united in purpose and prepared to face whatever the cosmos dared to throw their way. Diplomacy, what a joke, Silas muttered as he adjusted his uniform for the third time in as many minutes. It wasn't a great uniform, more duct tape than fabric, but it was all he had. He glanced at himself in the cracked mirror of his quarters. Looks like I've been through a meat grinder. Twice. Leora, standing in the doorway, snorted. You sure you're ready for this? She asked, her tone teasing but with an undercurrent of seriousness. Ready as I'll ever be to kiss alien backside, Silas replied, turning away from the mirror. You've got the signal ready, right? I'd rather not end up as Zekrel dinner. Signal's ready, Leora confirmed, holding up her trusty datapad like a badge. All set to impress the pants off our scaly friends. Assuming they wear pants, Silas grinned, though it was more of a grimace. The Zekrel weren't known for their fashion sense, nor their patience with human incompetence. Let's get this over with, then. They stepped onto the bridge, the rest of the crew already gathered and looking as enthusiastic as a bunch of kids told to eat their vegetables. Marin nodded at Silas, her expression one of cautious optimism, or maybe she had just resigned herself to the inevitable. Envoy Zavara is ready to meet, Marin announced, her voice steady as she flicked a switch on the console. Our illustrious guests are waiting. Perfect, Silas mumbled under his breath. The sooner we do this, the sooner I can go back to pretending we're not about to explode. The view screen flickered, then stabilized, revealing the imposing figure of Envoy Zavara. She, or perhaps it, stood there with the poise of an intergalactic judge who'd seen one too many pathetic defendants. Captain Dre, Zavara's voice reverberated through the bridge like the rumble of distant thunder. You wish to parley, beg for mercy, call it what you will, Silas replied, flashing what he hoped was a winning smile. We've got something that might interest you. Does it involve you vacating our claimed territory? Zavara asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. Better, Silas said, his voice infused with a confidence he didn't quite feel. We've found a way to control the bacteria threatening your terraforming efforts. Zavara arched what could be considered an eyebrow, though it might as well have been a disapproving tentacle. Explain. Silas gestured to Leora, who stepped forward with her datapad like a magician revealing her latest trick. We've developed a signal that can direct the bacteria, altering their growth patterns, Leora explained, her voice steady. Think of it as a cosmic shepherd's crook, and you trust this. Solution. Zavara's eyes glimmered with a mix of curiosity and derision. As much as you can trust anything in this universe, Silas replied, his tone wry. We've tested it and it works. We're willing to demonstrate if you'll grant us a temporary ceasefire. Zavara considered this, her silence heavy with calculation. Finally she nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. Very well, Captain Dre. A truce for now. Show us your human ingenuity. Silas nodded back, suppressing a sigh of relief. You won't regret it, he said, though he wasn't entirely sure who he was trying to convince, Zavara or himself. The crew sprang into action, each member a cog in the rickety machine that was their ship. Leora stationed herself at the console, fingers flying over the keys as she prepared to initiate the signal. Silas watched her work, feeling like a spectator at his own execution. Ready when you are, Leora, he said, trying to keep the tremor from his voice. Here goes nothing, Leora replied, hitting the final key with a flourish. The signal went live, broadcasting their message into the void, a digital song laced with commands and pleadings. The bridge was silent, the only sound the hum of the ship's struggling systems. On the viewscreen, Zavara watched with the dispassionate gaze of a scientist observing a particularly dull experiment. For a moment, it seemed as if nothing had happened. Then slowly, the bacteria began to respond, their chaotic patterns shifting, reorganizing as if they were dancers following an unseen conductor. It's working, Marin breathed, her eyes wide with astonishment. Silas let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered, a grin spreading across his face. Zavara studied the data streaming in, her expression unreadable. Impressive, she admitted, though her tone suggested that tolerable might have been more accurate. We'll take it, Silas replied, his voice tinged with triumph. So about that ceasefire, Zavara nodded, her gaze finally meeting his. A truce as agreed. You have proven yourselves. Resourceful, high praise coming from you, Silas said, his grin widening. Let's work together then. I think we could learn a thing or two from each other. Indeed, Zavara replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. We shall see how this partnership unfolds. As the connection ended, Silas turned to his crew, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and exhilaration. They had done it. Against all odds, they had found a way to survive, to triumph. Drinks are on me, he announced, the tension in his voice replaced by a jubilant defiance. Replicator be damned, the crew laughed, the sound echoing through the bridge like music. It was a laugh born of relief and camaraderie, a testament to their resilience in the face of the galaxy's indifference. Leora, Silas said, turning to her with genuine gratitude. You saved our skins. I owe you one. Make it two, Leora replied, her smile sly. I've got a list. Duly noted, Silas chuckled, his spirit buoyed by the prospect of a future that didn't involve being space dust. Here's to us, and whatever madness comes next. As the fortuitous misadventure continued its journey, its crew strengthened by their shared victory, Silas knew that the road ahead would be no less treacherous. But for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. And in the vast, uncaring cosmos, that was a victory all its own. The fortuitous misadventure hummed along like a drunken sailor staggering home after last call, barely holding it together but somehow managing not to trip over its own feet. After the unexpected triumph of not getting vaporized by the Zekrel, The crew found themselves in the rare position of having time to actually reflect on their unlikely success. A luxury, Scylla's thought, usually reserved for people not on the brink of cosmic obliteration. Scylla's Dre, captain, occasional diplomat and full-time cynic, lounged in his quarters. Well, lounged might be a bit generous. He was more slumped in a chair that had seen better days, probably back when spacecraft still needed rear mirrors. He gazed into the cracked mirror, the reflection a mosaic of fatigue and reluctant optimism. He lit a cigarette, purely out of habit, knowing full well that there was enough recycled oxygen in the ship to turn it into a floating tinderbox. But who was he to deny a little existential thrill? Leora Kintara, the ship's tech wizard and resident skeptic, poked her head through the door, a datapad clutched in her hand like it was the holy grail of keeping this rust bucket operational. "You know, one of these days that cigarette's going to be the death of us," she quipped. Scylla's exhaled a plume of smoke that danced through the cracks in the mirror, as if mocking him. "If it's not this, it'll be something else. I've got money on Terk's cooking finally doing us in." Leora grinned, stepping fully into the room. "You sure you want to tempt fate? We did just make peace with a species that considers creativity a second language and explosions a close third." Scylla shrugged, stubbing out the cigarette on a metal tray already overflowing with butts. "That's what I love about the universe. Just when you think it's got you figured out, it throws a curveball. Makes me wonder if it's all just one big cosmic joke." "Well, if it wasn't before, it definitely is now," Leora said, flopping into the chair opposite him. "So, what's the plan? Now that we're not about to become Zekrel appetizers?" Scylla's leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight like it was auditioning for a role in a horror movie. "I was thinking we could try not immediately screwing this up. Maybe see if we can turn this truce into something more permanent. The Zekrel could be useful allies." "Useful how? Like how a grenade is useful for catching fish?" Leora asked, eyebrows raised in mock skepticism. "More like how a big, scary guard dog is useful for keeping the neighbors from stealing your lawn chairs," Scylla's replied. Leora snorted. "Yeah, because we've got so much in the way of lawn furniture to protect." "Details," Scylla's waved a hand dismissively. "The point is, this alliance could be the start of something, not terrible." "High praise coming from you," Leora noted, a smile playing at her lips. "Think the Zekrel are interested in swapping gardening tips? I was thinking more along the lines of mutual defense, trade, maybe even some scientific exchange," Scylla said, feeling more optimistic than he had any right to be. "They're not all bad, and they appreciate our creativity. Hell, maybe they'll teach us to appreciate abstract art, or at least pretend to," Leora said. "I'll have to brush up on my looks like it belongs in a gallery face." A comfortable silence settled over them, the hum of the ship a familiar backdrop to their musings. It was a rarity, moments like these. Moments when they could pretend they weren't constantly fighting against the universe's worst intentions. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't out here trying not to die every day?" Scylla's asked, breaking the quiet. Leora considered, tapping her fingers against the datapad. "Probably something boring, like programming agribots to plow straighter rows or fixing vending machines." "You'd be wasted," Scylla said, and he meant it. Leora's mind was a steel trap, and if she wasn't solving existential threats, she'd be outsmarting them elsewhere. She smiled, a genuine expression that softened her usual sardonic edge. "What about you? What's the dream for Captain Scylla's Dre?" "I'm living it," Scylla's replied with a wry grin. "Flying around in a tin can, making peace with aliens, dodging death by a hair's breadth every other Tuesday." "Sounds like a dream," Leora laughed. "More like a fever dream," Scylla's corrected, but his voice was warm, his eyes bright with the camaraderie they shared. Terk strolled by the open door, a scowl etched into his face like it had been carved there by a particularly surly sculptor. "You two planning the next disaster or just chatting about the last one?" "Combination of both," Leora replied. "Keeps things interesting." "Interesting's one word for it," Terk grumbled. Me, I'd settle for boring. Boring doesn't get you spaced. Where's the fun in that? Silas asked, leaning forward, elbows on knees. Besides, we've got a treaty with the Zekrel now. We might actually get to take a breather, or a last breath, Terk retorted, but there was no real bite to his words. I'll believe it when I see it. That's the spirit, Silas said, giving Terk a mock salute. Keep that optimism in check. Wouldn't want to accidentally be hopeful, Terk replied, his scowl turning up just a fraction. As the makeshift gathering broke up, Leora lingered, eyeing Silas with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. You really think we can make something of this alliance? Silas met her gaze, seeing the same flicker of hope he felt reflected there. I think we have to try. We've been given a chance, and it'd be a damn shame to waste it. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the weight of their shared experiences settling comfortably between them. The universe might be a mess, but in that moment they were allies in more than just survival. To madness, Leora said softly, raising an imaginary glass, echoing their earlier toast. And to whatever comes next, Silas replied, clinking his own invisible drink against hers. With that they stood, ready to face the next chapter of their unlikely journey. Because in the end, surviving in the vast, indifferent cosmos was about more than just staying alive. It was about finding those rare moments of connection, of understanding, that made all the chaos worth enduring. Down in the ship's galley, Terk tried his hand at something edible, a task he approached with the enthusiasm of a man forced to wrestle a particularly disagreeable octopus. The replicator, predictably on the fritz, whirred and wheezed, producing something that could generously be called soup. Eat up, Terk grunted, sliding bowls toward his compatriots. Replicator special. Silas peered into his bowl, the liquid inside a suspicious shade of green. This better not be an alien delicacy. Only if the aliens really hate themselves, Leora mused, poking at her portion with a spoon as if it might bite back. Marines would kill for this, Terk said, deadpan. Literally? Well, I suppose it'll have to do until we figure out where we go from here, Silas said, taking a cautious sip. If the soup didn't kill him, inspiration might. Marin joined them, plopping down with a grunt, her expression one of resigned acceptance. Heard we're making friends with the neighbors, she said, her tone neutral but tinged with curiosity. More like non-enemies, Silas corrected. Baby steps, Marin nodded, slurping her soup with a grimace that could have curdled milk. Long as it doesn't end with us getting spaced, I'm all for it. That's the spirit, Leora chimed in. Let's aim for slightly less inevitable doom. As they ate, the conversation drifted to lighter topics, old stories, half-remembered jokes, the kind of banter that comes from living on the edge of oblivion long enough to stop noticing the drop. It was easy in moments like these to forget the precariousness of their situation. Afterward, as the crew scattered to their duties, Silas lingered, a speculative look on his face. You know, we could turn this around, start running missions for the Zekrel, make a business out of not dying. Leora laughed, her eyes bright with something like hope. The interstellar equivalent of a pest control service. Why not? Silas grinned. I've always said our specialty is surviving things that should have killed us. Job security, then, Marin said, her tone dry as a desert. And so, with stomachs full of questionable soup and hearts buoyed by the prospect of not meeting an explosive end, they set their sights on the future. It wasn't the most stable path, more a tightrope walk without a net, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The universe was a vast, uncaring place, indifferent to the struggles of those who dared to venture into its depths. But for Silas Dre and his crew, it was also a canvas, a place where they could carve out their own stories, however messy and chaotic they might be. To madness, Silas whispered once more, as the fortuitous misadventure sailed on, a ship of fools and dreamers bound together by the shared insanity of their cosmic journey. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to make it work. Because in the end, survival was about more than just staying above water. It was about making waves.